Your grandfather had diabetes. Your father had high blood pressure. Your mother had high cholesterol. And at some point, someone told you, it's genetic. It will probably happen to you too. You internalize that. You spent years living under that shadow. But what if that story is incomplete? What if, for many common age-related diseases, your genes function less like a fixed sentence and more like predispositions that interact with the environment? The science of epigenetics is rewriting what we thought we knew about genetic inheritance, and what researchers have discovered changes everything about how you should view your own body. This isn't motivation, it's biology. Let me tell you about Margaret. 63 years old, retired teacher. Her whole life she heard she would develop Alzheimer's because her mother had it, and her grandmother too. She told me something I'll never forget. I stopped making certain decisions because I felt like either way I was going to end up just like them. That resignation, that feeling of why even try, wasn't weakness. It was logic based on incomplete information, because science doesn't work that way. Your genes are not a prophecy, they're a dialogue, and you participate in that dialogue every time you eat, sleep, move, and breathe. Today we're going to understand how. Let's start with what you were taught. The standard story goes like this. You inherit DNA from your parents. That DNA determines whether you'll develop heart disease, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, Alzheimer's, certain types of cancer. You inherited the genes. They get expressed. There's not much you can do. That narrative has been around for decades, and it has a real, tangible consequence, one you may have already felt in your own body. You go to your doctor. They review your family history. They increase your routine screenings, maybe introduce preventive medication, and you walk out with that heavy feeling in your chest. That's not hypochondria. It's a real physiological response. When you believe you have no control over something threatening your health, your nervous system goes into alert mode. Cortisol rises. Your body literally shifts into defense mode, not because of the disease itself, but because of your belief about the disease. And there's more. People who strongly believe in genetic determinism tend to change their behaviors less. A study published in the journal Psychological Science examined this directly. When participants believed they had a gene that predisposed them to obesity, they reported less motivation to exercise, even when the gene was fictitious. So the belief itself, my genetics determine my destiny, becomes an independent risk factor. Do you understand what that means? It's not just that the story is incomplete, it's that the wrong story is actively working against you. But here's what most people have never heard. Your genes are less like fixed code and more like a set of switches, and research indicates that you may exert some influence over part of those mechanisms, especially those sensitive to environmental and behavioral factors. In 1942, a British biologist named Conrad Waddington coined a term that would take decades to gain the recognition it deserves: epigenetics. The word literally means above genetics. And that's exactly what it describes. Your genes are like the text of a book. But what determines which chapters are read, which remain closed, which are highlighted in yellow? That's epigenetics. And what influences epigenetics? Your environment, your behaviors, your daily choices. Let me make this concrete. Your body has mechanisms called methyl groups, small molecules that attach to your DNA and silence certain genes. When you eat a diet rich in vegetables, engage in resistance training, sleep well, and manage stress effectively, research suggests these mechanisms tend to silence genes associated with chronic inflammation and the progression of certain diseases. The reverse is also true. Chronic inflammation, physical inactivity, fragmented sleep, unmanaged stress. Evidence indicates these conditions may activate genes that were previously quiet. One of the most cited studies in this field examined identical twins, individuals with exactly the same DNA. Researchers found that over time, the twins' epigenetic profiles diverged significantly. Those with different lifestyles showed dramatically different gene expression patterns, despite having the same genetic code, same genes, completely different stories. And here's the part most people ignore, and it may be the most expensive mistake of your life. If you continue believing your genes determine your destiny, you won't act. Prolonged exposure to factors like chronic inflammation, persistent stress, and sedentary behavior has been associated in studies with observable epigenetic changes. Chronic inflammation, which can be amplified by stress, inactivity, and poor sleep, doesn't remain static. Studies suggest it may progressively alter gene expression in ways that increase the risk of cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, and insulin resistance. It's not inevitable, but it does require understanding that inaction carries biological consequences. You're not waiting to see what happens. You're actively participating in what happens. Now comes the part that completely changes how you should view your health after 50. There's an area of epigenetics receiving growing attention: telomeres. Think of your chromosomes, the structures that carry your genes, like shoelaces. At the tip of each shoelace, there's a small plastic cap that keeps it from fraying. Telomeres are that cap. Every time your cells divide, telomeres get slightly shorter. When they become too short, the cell stops functioning properly. That's associated with accelerated aging and several chronic diseases. But here's the discovery that shifted the conversation. Observational research suggests that certain behaviors are associated with differences in telomere length and maintenance over time. Scientist Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the 2009 Nobel Prize in Medicine for her work in this field, documented that meditation, moderate aerobic exercise, and meaningful social connection are associated with healthier telomere profiles. That doesn't mean you'll reverse your biological age overnight, but it does suggest that the pace of cellular aging may be partially modifiable. And there's something even more impactful. Studies in behavioral epigenetics show that stress, especially chronic stress perceived as uncontrollable, may accelerate telomere shortening. And one of the most consistent sources of chronic stress in people over 50. The belief that you have no control over your own health. Do you know what that means in practical terms? Evidence indicates that chronic stress perceived as uncontrollable is associated with biological markers linked to cellular aging, including telomere shortening over time. That's the cycle we need to break, and that's exactly why this conversation matters. So let's talk about what you can realistically do, not as a promise, but as evidence-informed direction. First, nutrition with epigenetic relevance. Research suggests certain dietary compounds have the potential to influence gene expression. Cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, arugula, contain sulforaphane, a compound studied for its ability to modulate inflammatory pathways. Dark leafy greens provide folate, which participates in DNA methylation processes. This is not a list of magic superfoods, it's biochemistry. But here's the important part. The best dietary approach for you is individual. Talk to a registered dietitian or physician about what makes sense for your specific health profile. Second, resistance training and consistent movement. Evidence indicates that exercise, especially strength training, may positively influence the expression of genes related to metabolism and mitochondrial function. You don't need a fancy gym. Many people over 50 report meaningful improvements with 20 to 30 minutes of structured movement per day. Consistency matters more than extreme intensity. Third, stress management as a non-negotiable practice. This goes beyond relaxing. Research suggests that regular stress reduction practices, meditation, breathwork, time in nature, meaningful social connection, may influence inflammatory markers and telomere integrity. This isn't spa advice, it's biology. Fourth, sleep as an epigenetic tool. During deep sleep, your body carries out cellular repair and hormonal regulation processes that directly impact gene expression. Chronic sleep deprivation has been associated in studies with DNA methylation patterns that favor systemic inflammation. And here's what ties it all together. None of these actions is a silver bullet, but combined, they create the internal environment that signals to your genes which chapters should be read. You're not trying to outsmart your genetics. You're having a more intelligent conversation with them. Look, I know you probably grew up hearing that certain diseases run in the family, that it was just a matter of time, that there wasn't much you could do, and that belief, even if well-intentioned, may have cost you years of agency over your own health. But now you have a different perspective, one that science has been building for decades, and that is finally reaching the conversations that truly matter. For most common chronic conditions, your genes represent predispositions, not guarantees. They are the starting point of a conversation you're having with your body every time you eat, sleep, move, breathe, and connect. You don't need perfection. You need direction. And the most important direction is this: you are not a passive observer of your biology. You are an active participant in it. Margaret, the teacher I mentioned at the beginning, she spoke to me a few months after shifting her perspective on epigenetics. She said, "For the first time in years, I feel responsible for my health. Not in the sense of blame, but in the sense of power." That's exactly it. Not blame, power. You deserve this information, and now you have it. If this video made you think differently about your health, I have a next step for you. Watch the video on how chronic inflammation affects the brain after 50. Because what you just learned about epigenetics connects directly to what researchers are discovering about memory and cognition. The link is on your screen. I'll see you there.